I still remember the way the phone felt in my hand that morning. Cold, heavy, almost foreign. My son's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was calling to ask if I'd bring my famous pecan pie for Christmas, or to see if I needed a ride. For years, Christmas had been my favorite time. One day when laughter filled the house, and the scent of cinnamon and pine seemed to erase all the aches of age, I answered with a smile in my voice, already picturing the grandkids tearing into their presents, the fire crackling, the old family ornaments twinkling on the tree. But his voice was different this time. Flat, clipped, businesslike. "Dad, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas this year," he began, and something in my chest tightened. He cleared his throat, and I could almost hear the distance growing between us, like a door slowly closing. "We've decided to keep it just for the immediate family this time. You know, with everything going on, it's just simpler. Simpler." The word echoed in my mind, sharp as a slap. I tried to laugh it off, to remind him of all the years I'd hosted Christmas. The way I'd stay up late stringing lights so he'd wake up to a house that looked like magic. I reminded him of the time he broke his arm sledding, and I carried him inside.
Ow.
I'd always made sure Christmas was special, no matter how tight money was or how tired I felt. But he just sighed, impatient. "It's not personal, Dad. We just need some space this year. Maybe next time." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I wanted to argue, to beg, to remind him that family is supposed to mean something. But all I could do was nod, even though he couldn't see me, and say, "All right, son, I understand." When the call ended, I stared at the empty living room, the boxes of decorations I'd already pulled from the attic. The warmth of all those Christmases past seemed to drain away, replaced by a cold I couldn't shake. But what I did next would change everything. It's strange how a single moment can make you question the meaning of a lifetime. After that call, I sat in my old recliner, the one with the faded arms and the creak that always made the grandkids giggle, and let my mind wander back through the years. I suppose that's what happens when you're left alone with your thoughts. Memories come flooding in, uninvited but impossible to ignore. I remember the first Christmas after my wife passed. My son was only 12, his eyes red from crying, his voice small and uncertain. I was lost myself, but I knew I had to keep us afloat to give him something to hold on to. That year, I worked double shifts at the mill, coming home with my hands raw and my back aching, just so I could afford a tree and a few presents. I stayed up late on Christmas Eve, stringing popcorn and cranberries, humming carols under my breath, determined to make the house feel warm and alive. When he woke up and saw the living room glowing with lights, his face lit up in a way I'll never forget. For a moment, the grief faded, replaced by wonder. That's when I realized what Christmas could mean. A promise that no matter how hard life got, we'd always have each other. Every year after that, I made it my mission to keep that promise. I started little traditions, hot cocoa with extra marshmallows, reading a Christmas carol by the fire, hiding a silver dollar in the pudding for good luck. Even when money was tight, I found ways to make the season special. I'd save up all year for one big gift, something he'd been dreaming of. It's a new bike, a set of paints, a telescope to watch the stars. I wanted him to know he was loved, that he mattered more than anything. As he grew older, the sacrifices changed shape but never stopped. When he wanted to go to college, I picked up extra hours, sometimes working weekends and holidays. I remember coming home late, the house dark and quiet, my dinner cold on the table, but I never complained. I was proud of him, proud that he wanted more, that he was reaching for something bigger. I paid every tuition bill, every rent check, even when it meant going without new clothes or skipping vacations. I told myself it was worth it, that one day he'd look back and understand. When he graduated, I felt a swell of pride so big it nearly knocked me over. I watched him walk across that stage, tall and confident, and thought, "That's my boy." I helped him get there. He hugged me afterward, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to sit on my lap and begged for one more story before bed. Then came the house. He and his wife wanted a place of their own, but the bank wouldn't give them a loan without a cosigner. I didn't hesitate. I dipped into my savings for the down payment, signed my name on the dotted line, and handed over the keys with a smile. I told him it was a gift, a way to start his own traditions, to build a life for his family. I pictured myself visiting for Sunday dinners, watching the grandkids play in the yard, maybe even spending Christmases together in that house, filled with laughter and love. For a while, it was just like I'd hoped. They invited me over for birthdays and barbecues, let me spoil the grandkids with too many sweets and stories. I'd bring over boxes of old ornaments, show them how to hang the angel just right on the tree. We'd sing carols, bake cookies, and I'd feel that old warmth, the sense that I belonged. But slowly, things began to change. The invitations came less often. My daughter-in-law started making excuses. Too busy, too tired, the kids had activities. My son would call, but the conversations grew shorter, more distracted. I told myself it was just the way life goes, that families drift as children grow. Still, every year, I'd show up with gifts and a smile, hoping to recapture a little of that old magic. Last year, I noticed the difference most. I arrived with a tin of homemade fudge, only to find the house already decorated, the tree trimmed without me. The grandkids were polite but distant, more interested in their phones than my stories. My son seemed preoccupied, barely making eye contact. I left early, walking home through the cold, the tin of fudge still half full. Now, sitting alone in my living room, the silence feels heavier than ever. The boxes of decorations gather dust, the stockings limp and empty. I think of all those years, every overtime shift, every missed meal, every dollar saved and spent for his happiness. I wonder if he remembers if any of it mattered. The joy and closeness we once shared have been replaced by a distance I can't seem to cross. It's a strange kind of loneliness. The kind that comes not from being alone, but from being forgotten by the very people you built your life around. I stare at the phone, half hoping it will ring again, that he'll change his mind. But deep down, I know things have changed. The warmth of the past is just a memory now, flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. And yet, as I sit in the quiet, something inside me begins to stir. A sense that maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop waiting for an invitation that will never come. Looking back, I can see now that the distance didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly like a draft under a door, barely noticeable at first. After my son married, I was happy for him, truly. I wanted him to have the kind of partnership his mother and I once shared. At first, his wife was polite, even friendly. But there was always a certain reserve in her eyes, a carefulness in her words. I chalked it up to nerves, to the awkwardness of blending families, and I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I offered to help with the move, brought over casseroles, and even fixed a leaky faucet in their first apartment. She thanked me, but her smile never quite reached her eyes as the years passed. The invitations to family gatherings became less frequent. At first, I was always included, birthdays, anniversaries, the kids' school plays, but gradually I noticed I was being left out. Sometimes it was a forgotten phone call, other times a last-minute excuse. "We're just so busy, Dad," my son would say, his voice distracted as if he were already thinking about something else. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself they had their own lives, their own routines. Still, each time I was left out, it stung a little more. The real shift came after I helped them buy their house. I remember the day I handed my son the check for the down payment. He hugged me, and for a moment I felt like the proud father I'd always been. But after the papers were signed and the boxes unpacked, something changed. My daughter-in-law started making comments about boundaries and privacy. She'd bristle when I dropped by unannounced, even if it was just to bring over a pie or mow the lawn. My son, caught in the middle, would apologize, but his words felt empty. I started calling before visiting, and waiting for an invitation that rarely came. It was around this time that I began to notice a pattern. Whenever they needed something, help with the mortgage, a new appliance, money for the kids' activities, I was the first person they called. My son would speak to me with warmth and gratitude, but as soon as the check cleared, the warmth would fade. I became, in their eyes, less a father and more a safety net, a resource to be tapped when convenient. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I'd stopped by to drop off a birthday gift for my granddaughter. The door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp and impatient. He's always around, asking questions, wanting to help. It's too much. I wish he'd just let us live our lives. My son replied, quieter but no less dismissive. He means well, but sometimes I think he forgets it's not his house. At least he's good for the mortgage. I stood there, gift in hand, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. I left the present on the porch and walked away, my heart heavier than it had been in years. That night, I lay awake, replaying their words over and over. Good for the mortgage. Not good for much else, apparently, after that. I started to pull back, stopped offering help unless asked, stopped dropping by unannounced. I waited for them to reach out, but the calls grew fewer and farther between. When they did call, it was almost always about money. The warmth, the laughter, the sense of belonging I'd once felt was gone, replaced by a transactional coldness I couldn't ignore. The final blow came with that phone call about Christmas. I'd already bought gifts for the grandkids, wrapped in shiny paper with ribbons and bows. I'd even found an old ornament from my son's childhood, a little wooden train he used to love. I'd planned to give it to him to remind him of the magic we once shared. But now, sitting alone in my living room, I realized that magic was gone. I looked around at the decorations I'd set out, the stockings hung with care, the tree twinkling in the corner. All of it felt hollow, a reminder of what I'd lost. For years, I'd given everything I had, my time, my money, my love, hoping it would be enough to keep us close. But in the end, it seemed I was only valued for what I could provide, not for who I was. The pain of that realization was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to grow. Quiet, simmering resolve. I'd spent my whole life putting others first, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of family. But now, I saw things clearly. I was more than a checkbook, more than a burden to be managed. I was a father, a man who deserved respect and kindness. As I sat there, the ache in my chest slowly gave way to a new feeling, not anger exactly, but a determination I hadn't felt in years. I realized I had to stand up for myself. If my son and his family couldn't see my worth, then maybe it was time I reminded them. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak and settle around me. The silence was thick, pressing in on all sides, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the dresser. I thought about my son's words, the way he'd said immediate family as if I were a distant relative, a name on a list he could cross off without a second thought. The ache in my chest was more than loneliness. It was the sting of being unwanted by the person I'd given everything for. I replayed the years in my mind, searching for the moment things had gone wrong. Had I been too involved? Not involved enough? Was I too generous, making it easy for him to take me for granted? Or had I failed to teach him the value of gratitude, of family? The questions circled endlessly, each one heavier than the last. I wondered if my sacrifices had been mistakes, if all the overtime hours, the missed meals, the sleepless nights had only built a wall between us instead of a bridge. I thought about the times I'd swallowed my pride, letting small slights slide for the sake of peace. The times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no, just to keep the family together. I remembered the look in my son's eyes when he was a boy, how he'd run to me after a nightmare, how he'd beam with pride when I cheered him on at his games. Where had that little boy gone? And who was this man who now saw me as an inconvenience? The pain of it all settled deep in my bones. I felt old, truly old, in a way I never had before. I wondered if this was how it ended for men like me, quietly, invisibly, edged out of the lives we'd built. I thought of my own father, a proud man who'd taught me the value of hard work and honesty. He used to say, "A man's worth isn't measured by what he gives, but by how he's treated when he has nothing left to give." I'd always admired his strength, his quiet dignity, the way he stood tall even when life tried to knock him down. Lying there in the dark, I realized I'd lost sight of that lesson. I'd let myself become small, shrinking to fit the space my son allowed me. I'd given so much that I'd forgotten I was allowed to want something in return: respect, kindness, a place at the table. I thought about all the times I'd been overlooked, all the times I'd been called only when money was needed, and I felt a slow, simmering anger begin to replace the sadness. I wasn't ready to be cast aside. Not yet. There was still fight. Left in me, still a part of me that remembered what it meant to stand tall. My father's words echoed in my mind, a reminder that dignity isn't something you're given, something you claim for yourself. I decided right then and there that I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. If my son couldn't see my worth, I would show him. I would remind him and myself that I was more than a wallet, more than a burden. I was a father, a man with pride, and I still had a say in how this chapter ended. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The ache in my chest was still there, but it was different now. Less like a wound, more like a scar. I moved through the house with purpose, making coffee, straightening the living room, opening the curtains to let in the pale winter light. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring or for an invitation that would never come. I was done waiting. I was ready to act. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped my son with his homework, where we'd shared countless meals and stories. I pulled out the old metal lockbox from the hall closet, the one where I kept important papers, birth certificates, insurance policies, and tucked in the back, the thick envelope marked mortgage. My hands trembled a little as I opened it, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I spread the documents out before me, reading each line carefully. I remembered the day I'd signed them, my son's hopeful face across the desk, his wife's nervous smile. I'd agreed to co-sign without hesitation, wanting to give them a start, a home of their own. I'd trusted that my name on those papers was a symbol of love, not a leash. But now, as I read the fine print, I realized I still held the power to call in the loan. The house, the very roof over their heads, was as much mine as it was theirs. The thought made me pause. Was I really the kind of man who would take away his own son's home? The question gnawed at me, and for a moment I felt the old doubts creeping in. Was this revenge, or was it justice? Was I acting out of spite, or was I finally standing up for myself after years of being taken for granted? I needed advice, so I called my old friend George, a retired lawyer who'd always been straight with me. We met at the diner over black coffee and dry toast. I slid the documents across the table, my voice low. "George, I need to know what my rights are. If I call on the loan, what happens?" He read through the papers, his brow furrowed. "Legally, you're within your rights. You co-signed. You can call it in. But this isn't just about paperwork, right? This is about family." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know, but I can't keep letting them treat me like I'm nothing. I need to do something, George. Not to hurt them, but to remind them that I matter." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Sometimes, the only way people learn is when they're forced to face the consequences of their actions. Just make sure you're doing this for the right reasons." I went home and sat with the decision for days. I thought about the grandkids, about the memories tied up in that house. I thought about my son's face when he realized what I'd done. Would he hate me? Would he finally understand? The emotional cost was high, but so was the cost of staying silent, of letting myself be erased from my own family's story. I wrote a letter to my son, not to explain myself, but to lay out the truth. I told him how much I loved him, how proud I'd been to help him build a life. I told him about the pain of being excluded, of feeling like a burden instead of a father. I wrote about dignity, about the lessons my own father had taught me, and about the line I could no longer let him cross. I sealed the letter and placed it with the mortgage documents. The next day I called the bank. My voice was steady as I explained my decision. The woman on the other end was polite, professional, but I could hear the surprise in her tone. "Are you sure, sir? So require your son to pay off the loan or refinance without your name?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "It's time." When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to what others did. I was making a choice for myself. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I was a man reclaiming his dignity, one signature at a time. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The house was still quiet, the phone still silent, but the emptiness didn't feel so heavy. I knew there would be consequences, that my son would be angry, maybe even hurt. But I also knew that I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself away until there was nothing left. I had drawn a line, and for the first time in a long time I felt whole. I wasn't acting out of bitterness. I was acting out of self-respect. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that whatever happened next, I would face it with my head held high. It didn't take long for the news to reach my son. The bank moved quickly, sending out the formal notice by certified mail. I imagined the confusion on his face as he opened the envelope, the disbelief turning to anger as he read the words. I knew him well enough to picture the way he'd pace the kitchen, voice rising as he called his wife, the two of them trying to make sense of what was happening. I braced myself for a inevitable phone call. The confrontation I'd been dreading, and, in some strange way, waiting for it came on a Thursday evening. Just as the sun was setting and the house was bathed in that golden light that always made me feel a little less alone. My phone rang, and I saw his name flash across the screen. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I answered, my voice steady. "Hello, son. You didn't waste time on pleasantries." "Dad, what the hell is this?" "I just got a notice from the bank. They said you're calling in the mortgage? Is this some kind of mistake?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No, it's not a mistake." There was a pause, then his voice, sharper now. "Why would you do this? Do you have any idea what this means for us? We can't just pay off the mortgage. We'll have to refinance, and with the rates now, Dad, this could ruin us." I listened to the panic in his voice, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. For years, I'd have done anything to avoid this kind of confrontation. I would have apologized, tried to smooth things over, offered to help, but not this time. This time, I stood my ground. "I know exactly what it means," I said quietly. "And I didn't make this decision lightly. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, about everything that's happened between us these last few years." He scoffed, frustration bleeding through. "So you're punishing us? Over Christmas? Because we wanted to have a quiet holiday for once." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "This isn't about Christmas. Not really. It's about respect. It's about how I've been treated, not just this year, but for a long time. I've given everything I have to this family. I helped you buy that house, co-signed the mortgage, gave you every bit of support I could. And lately it feels like the only time I matter is when you need something from me." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "Dad, you're overreacting. We're just busy. Life is complicated. You know we appreciate you." I let out a slow breath. "Do you? Because it doesn't feel that way? It feels like I'm a burden, like I'm only good for my wallet. When you told me not to come for Christmas, it wasn't just about one holiday. It was about being pushed aside, made to feel like I don't belong in the family I helped build." His voice softened, just a little. "Dad, that's not what we meant. We just needed some space." "I understand needing space," I replied. "But there's a difference between space and exclusion. There's a difference between setting boundaries and making someone feel unwanted. I've spent my whole life putting you first, sacrificing so you could have more. But I can't keep giving if it means losing myself in the process." He was quiet again, and for a moment, I wondered if he was remembering all those years. The late nights, the sacrifices, the love I'd poured into every corner of his life. I hoped he was. I hoped he could see that this wasn't about revenge, but about reclaiming my dignity. "So what now?" he finally asked, his voice small, almost childlike. "You're just cutting us off?" I felt a pang of sadness, but I didn't let it sway me. "I'm not cutting you off. I'm reminding you that respect goes both ways. I'm asking you to see me as more than a checkbook, more than a burden. I want to be part of your life, not just when it's convenient, but because I matter to you." He didn't answer right away. I could hear his breathing, the weight of my words settling in. Finally, he said, I didn't realize you felt that way." "I know," I said gently. "But now you do." There was another long pause, and then he hung up without another word. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I knew I'd done the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. I'd drawn my line in the sand, and now it was up to him to decide what came next. You won't believe how my son reacted. The days after that call were quieter than I expected. I thought I'd be racked with guilt, second-guessing myself, but instead I felt a strange sense of calm. The house was still, the phone didn't ring, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide if I mattered. I woke up each morning with a little more lightness in my step, a little less weight on my shoulders. It was as if, by finally standing up for myself, I'd opened a window and let the stale air out. I spent those first few days tending to small things I'd neglected. Fixing the loose step on the porch, oiling the hinges on the old gate, sweeping the walk. I found comfort in the rhythm of these simple tasks. The way they reminded me that I could still shape my own world, even if it was just my little corner of it. I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood, nodding to familiar faces, stopping to chat with Mrs. Evans about her roses or with old Mr. Patel about the weather. I realized how much I'd let my world shrink, waiting for invitations that never came when there was a whole community around me, ready to welcome me if I just reached out. One afternoon, as I was raking leaves, I heard a voice call out from across the street. It was Tom, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. He waved me over, and before I knew it, we were sitting on his porch, sharing stories and laughter like no time had passed at all. He told me about his grandkids, about the fishing trips he still took every summer, about the way he'd learned to find joy in the small things. I listened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen, not as a burden, not as a wallet, but as a friend. As Christmas approached, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit alone in my house, surrounded by memories and regrets. I called my sister, who lived a few towns over, and asked if I could join her family for the holiday. She sounded delighted, her voice warm and welcoming. Of course you can. We'd love to have you. The kids have been asking about Uncle Joe. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket, softening the ache that still lingered in my chest. On Christmas Eve, I packed a small bag, loaded the car with a few gifts, and drove through the quiet streets, the world dusted with fresh snow. As I pulled up to my sister's house, I saw the windows glowing with light, heard the sound of laughter spilling out onto the porch. The door swung open, and I was greeted with hugs, with the smell of roasting turkey. With the chaos and joy of a family that was happy to have me there, I sat by the fire, a mug of cocoa in my hands, and watched the children play, their faces bright with excitement. For the first time in years, I felt at home. That night, as I lay in the guest room, listening to the muffled sounds of the house settling around me, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about my son, about the choices I'd made, about the pain and the healing that had come from finally drawing a line. I realized that love, real love, isn't about what you give or what you get. It's about respect, about being seen and valued for who you are. I'd spent so many years trying to earn my place, trying to prove my worth, when all along, I'd had the right to claim it for myself. In the weeks that followed, I found myself opening up more, reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with. I joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at the community center, even took up painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned when life got too busy. Each new connection, each small act of kindness, reminded me that I was still capable of joy, still worthy of love. As for my son, it took time. At first, there was only silence. I wondered if he'd ever understand, if he'd ever forgive me for forcing him to see me as more than a convenience. But slowly, the ice began to thaw. He sent a card in the new year, a simple note that said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you. Can we talk?" It wasn't everything, but it was a start. I wrote back telling him I loved him, that I hoped we could rebuild not on the old terms, but on new ones, with honesty and respect. I know now that setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting the right people in. It's about making space for those who value you, who see your worth, want you in their lives for who you are, not for what you can give. It's about standing tall, even when it's hard, and refusing to let anyone make you feel unwelcome in your own family. If you're listening to my story and you've ever felt like a burden, if you've ever been pushed aside by the people you love, I want you to know you're not alone. You have the right to draw your own lines, to demand respect, to find your place in the world, even if it's not where you expected. Sometimes the family we choose is the one that truly sees us. It's the one that welcomes us with open arms and open hearts. Never let anyone make you feel unwelcome in your own family. You are worthy of love, of respect, of a seat at the table. And if you have a story like mine, if you found the courage to stand up for yourself, or if you're still searching for that strength, I hope you'll share it. We're all in this together, learning, growing, and finding our way home. So tell me, what's your story?